Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson, and we are brought to you by Prize Picks. Use the promo code ROTOPOD for a 100% deposit match. This week, I've got the great Jordan Rosenblum of many fantastic sites, Rotographs, Scout the Stat Line, Prospects Live, just doing a ton of great work. And so we're going to talk about a lot of just dynasty-related topics, risers, fallers. We're going to talk some Highlander Dynasty Invitational. I think Jordan's going to propose a trade to me on air towards the end of the show, so keep your eye out for that. I do also want to just say, I appreciate kind of overwhelmed by all the people reaching out, asking when the prospect rankings update is going to be live on RotoWire.com. Working basically around the clock on that, and hoping to get that up either Thursday or Friday of this week. And then also just a minor note, we added contact rate to the minor league batted ball stats page where you get your hard hit data at rotowire.com. So I know that a lot of you have been wanting contact rate up there along with strikeout rate and walk rate. So that is up there. So that is a great page to just have open. I think Jordan and I are going to start talking about the Highlander Dynasty Invitational and the fan favorite decisions that had to be made by May 15th. This is the first of several off-season keeper designations that need to be made in the Highlander Dynasty Invitational. And it is any player who has eclipsed their rookie eligibility, and it cannot be a player who was selected in the first or in the Highlander draft, which is a one-round draft that takes place after 60 keepers are selected. So essentially it's going to be a player who probably was a borderline top 100 type of player coming into the year. And so I thought Jordan and I could just talk about our favorite of the fan favorite designations. We're not going to focus on teams that maybe didn't have a great option here. So Jordan, which fan favorite keeper do you want to mention first as one of your favorites?
So for the fan favorite, something I've learned over the years, the first year I kept Joey Gallo as my fan favorite, which is a colossal error. And I basically was overreacting to the shift, like the new shift rules. I thought Gallo was going to be this big star. So you want like a high floor. It really sucks to get stuck with. Now I'm stuck with him for 3 years. So I kind of thought about that. Prioritizing high floor guys with like good WAR projections, even though we don't care WAR isn't a fantasy stat, but it does matter for playing time a lot. So I tried to focus on guys that had really high floor. And I thought the three that stood out to me were the itch kept Josh Naylor. I think he's been taking a real step forward this year, and he's been a real breakout star. And he's young enough that I don't think his playing time or anything will be an issue in the next 3 years, even though he doesn't have defensive value. Then Volpe from Waterloo is another really high floor player with good defensive value, playing up the middle and good power speed skills. And then my third pick was William Contreras from Alexander Sanchez, probably the best catcher these days, because he literally hasn't rested yet this year, and he's been quite good. So I thought those were three really high floor, very solid fan favorite selections.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the idea of focusing on the high floor players here, because I think you kind of want to hit like doubles and singles with these picks, and sometimes they can turn into home runs if a player sort of exceeds expectations. But I think kind of the key to this league, or one of the big keys to this league, is to be outperforming other rosters with your designated keepers. And it's just hard to do that if you're getting 0 out of multiple of your designated keepers, kind of like the Joey Gallo example you had. There were some good pitchers selected as fan favorites, but I'm not going to pick any of the pitchers. You didn't pick any of the pitchers because, I was kind of going back and looking at rosters and past fan favorite decisions, and it's kind of 50-50 as to whether the pitcher keepers worked out at all. You got guys like Shane McClanahan and Luis Garcia who are basically just stuck on their rosters while they're rehabbing Tommy John surgery. So yeah, I definitely wanted to focus on floor as well. And Naylor was definitely the guy that stood out to me the most, just because I think he's got the highest combination of floor and ceiling. But he was one of my considerations for my pick in the Highlander draft. And I semi regret not taking him over Kyle Bradish, but definitely would have been in consideration for my favorite of the fan favorites, Josh Naylor with the Guardians. And then, yeah, you said Anthony Volpe. I think he probably makes my top 3 as well. Waterloo with him, the itch with Josh Naylor. Volpe's just got such a high floor because of the defense. Like, we just know that he's going to be the Yankees shortstop for the entirety of these next 3 years. And then, I thought William Contreras was a strong option. I thought Bryson Stott was a really good one too, for Jesse. I thought Bryson Stott was kind of I had a ton of Bryson Stott last year, and I thought the price was just sort of, I thought it was too high before the season, to be honest with you. And he's just become significantly better, which I didn't necessarily expect, but you can't rule that out with a player going from 25 to 26. Stott's walking more than he's striking out this year. Hitting for more power than last year, still stealing a bunch of bases. So I think I might lean actually Stott along with Volpe and Naylor as my 3 favorite. I love William Contreras, but it's not that difficult to get decent production from your catcher spot in this league, with being a 20 team league and there just being so many good catchers out there. But, I also thought like Colton Cowser was a good one for Brett Sayer, Zach Neto for Smada. I really like the hitters who are kind of in that 24, 25, 26 range, because you're locking up the next 3 years. So you kind of hope/assume you're getting 3 of their best years there with that keeper selection if you do get one of those position players in that age range.
Yeah, I agree. Stott I had there at first, and then I swapped him for Contreras, but easily could swap him back. And like you, I was kind of out on him going into the year, but he's definitely improved his projections a lot in these first 2 months. And then Ha-Seong Kim, I think is also a pretty high floor pick that almost made the cut for me. My pick was kind of interesting because I was the first one to announce Jung-Ho Lee, who has been underperforming, but he's hitting the ball a lot harder than expected, like higher max exit velo than expected. And he was running a lot more, getting caught stealing, but running a lot more than expected. Then he basically screwed up his shoulder, and now he's out for the season, on the eve of the deadline. So I was like, what do I do here? Long term, I thought it could sap his power a little bit more when he first comes back, but it's not a huge part of his game. And the other alternatives I have were just too high risk for me. So like Eloy was one that I considered, and Carlos Rodon was another, and they were just a bit too risky for me. So I stuck with it, but it was a tough decision.
Yeah, I didn't. I'm not as enthusiastic about mine either. I can kind of tell you're not that enthusiastic about yours. I went with Leody Taveras, just kind of. And he's kind of slumped a little since I made that pick, but I think he's a guy that should be able to play pretty much every day for some team, even if it's kind of towards the bottom third of an order. And he's 25 right now. It's possible, I think, that age 26, age 27, one of those years, maybe he takes a step forward and shows kind of a 2020 type of ceiling. But it was between Leody Taveras and Jose Barrios for me, and I just didn't want to get stuck with a year and a half of injured Barrios and getting nothing. And in our 20-team league here, where we start 5 outfielders, Taveras is not amazing by any stretch, but he does kind of rank top 30 in terms of runs scored by outfielders. He's probably on pace to get to 16, 17 homers, 16, 17 steals, something like that this year. So not enthusiastic about my Leody pick, but just kind of thought it was the best of some bad options. Going into the year, I was anticipating my fan favorite actually being one of either Parker Meadows or Matt Wallner. So you can kind of see that that kind of went off the rails. And then I was one start away from being able to keep Jared Jones as a fan favorite, but that would have been a little bit, it would have been some trepidation there, just given that how hard he throws and his age and everything like that. But I probably would have just gone for it with the Jones pick if he'd been eligible.
Yeah, I think you can pick a pitcher, and some of the pitchers age really well, but you should have a really high bar. But I think Jones would fit that. And is he work for your underdog as well, like our next designation? Okay, yeah. So that same for me with Crochet. I think that works pretty well for us. But
yeah, I think I would have gone with him for fan favorite and probably found an okay option at the underdog as well. Just because I'm so kind of lukewarm is probably even too high for how I feel about the Leote pick there. Okay,
I think he is a high floor pick though with his defense, and I just added him in my RotoWire OC a couple weeks back, and you can't really complain. So I think it's a pretty safe pick at least.
Okay, so I also wanted you to pick your three fan favorite designations from past years in the Highlander, because everyone still has their original fan favorite designation from year one. So every team has three of these guys now. So I thought there were just some really good ones. You could go with a good hitter. I was torn with how much I wanted to reward the teams that kind of went for it with a pitcher, and I don't know if got lucky is the right term, but avoided some landmines with certain pitchers. But who stood out to you in terms of your favorite fan favorite keepers from past seasons?
Yeah, so I think it kind of goes against what I was saying before, but I think there were a lot of really good pitcher picks that they're like bona fide SP1s like going into this year. So they kind of met that bar for me to be worth risking it on fan favorite. So I think Sperling's Glasnow fan favorite is perhaps the best, most valuable designation in the league. Though he also has Strider protected, and I would have said that about Strider a couple months ago, and that wouldn't have aged well. But I think that one's really good. And then I liked Pablo Lopez for Jesse, and for Ponce, Gausman. I think he just has 1 year left of Gausman, so he's stayed pretty healthy. He's underperformed sort of high ERA this year, but I think he's fine in terms of like projections perspective. So I like those three picks, and it was harder to find like a really standout bat picks for me to compare. Edwin Diaz was not a bad pick as a closer from Itch also, but I wonder if you had any bats that you liked.
I think the four bats that I wrote down were Will Smith for Fargus, let's see, Alec Boehm for Shelley. That was DJ Short who made that initial designation, but Shelley's got the team now. And then Smada's got Gleyber Torres and Christian Yelich as fan favorites. And despite how bad Gleyber's been this year, I do think, process-wise and just kind of putting yourself in position to have Gleyber and Yelich in those spots, I do think that's really solid. But I don't know if you think any of those four, Will Smith, Boehm, Gleyber, Yelich, they don't really compare from a value standpoint of these healthy Glasnow, Drew Wheeler as Zach Gallen, Ken Belderson as Logan Gilbert as well. So I don't think any of these guys really compare to the high end Joe Ryan for Eric Cross. I think those guys from a value standpoint beat the hitters, but I just think from a safety standpoint and a process standpoint, I do kind of want to tip my cap to those strong hitter selections.
Yeah, I think especially Gleyber stood out to me as like a really high floor pick that is consistent with the guys we liked this time around. Like a lot of those guys kind of fit that mold, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, great. Loving the Highlander. I should probably update the listeners just quickly on the top of the standings there, since it is a analyst league, and It's a very challenging league. So we got Chris Vargas in first place currently, Akeem Glaspie in second place, Jesse Roach, Eddie Almager, Eric Cross rounding out the top 5. So great job to all of them so far. We are going to head to a message from our sponsors, but when we come back, Jordan and I are going to talk about bat speed and how you should be approaching bat speed as a tool for player evaluation. So stay tuned. Have you ever dreamed of stepping into the shoes of general manager? Welcome to So Rare, MLB, a groundbreaking fantasy baseball game where you call the shots. Take charge and make your managerial mark by collecting officially licensed digital player cards of your favorite MLB stars. These aren't just any cards. They're your ticket to compete for over $1 million in total cash rewards and other amazing prizes. Imagine winning VIP trips to the MLB All-Star 2024 or getting your hands on assigned merchandise from top MLB players. Here's how it works. Use your cards to set your lineup each game week. Real-world plays like hits, strikeouts, and homers will power your team's performance. Climb the leaderboards and snag weekly wins from cash prizes to more cards and unforgettable experiences. But there's more. Build an iconic collection of your favorite teams and players to unlock gameplay bonuses and exclusive rewards. The rarer the card, the higher your score, and the bigger your edge in competitions. And when you're ready to trade, the So Rare Marketplace offers a vibrant community of managers. Engage in live auctions, make instant buys, or trade cards to peer-to-peer. Starting is absolutely free. Draft your first team of common cards today and feel the thrill of competition as you climb the ranks to baseball mastery. What are you waiting for? Join So Rare MLB today. Transform your passion for baseball into a quest for glory and get rewarded for your baseball savvy. Sign up today with the link in the description and get 50% off your first pro cards up to $50. It's your passion rewarded. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country. Prize Picks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Tonight, I like the under on Daniel Gafford, 8.5 points against the Mavericks. Just think that they're going to lean more on Derek Lively there, and it's going to be tough for him to score against Minnesota's size. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Download the app today and use code ROTOPOD for a first deposit match up to $100. That's promo code ROTOPOD for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Okay, Jordan, you just had a piece go up on Rotographs about bat speed, and I wanted to talk with you about that just because it's kind of the topic du jour over the past couple of weeks since that got released on Baseball Savant. So how should people say I'm not someone that's programming leaderboards or anything like that, or doing a lot of stuff with data? How would novices approach this bat speed information as a tool for player evaluation?
Yeah, so if I'm going to a Fangraphs player page in the past, if I wanted to look at maybe 2 or 3 key metrics, I'd be focusing one on like the plate discipline metrics, so like walks and strikeouts for a hitter, and then I'd want some indicator of power. In the past, barrel rate has been like the gold standard of power metrics, and I think it still is. Like, having gone through my article, I've been a little back and forth about this. I think it still is, but bat speed is pretty close. So if you're just looking for an indicator of power, you can look at xwOBAcon, you can look at barrel rate, you can look at bat speed. You can kind of triangulate those in your head. And the league average is 71, so you can kind of triangulate those in your head. And if some guy has 0 homers or has very little power, but his bat speed is like 74 miles per hour, like Corbin Carroll, then perhaps he's due for some positive regression there. And then if you're thinking from the perspective of someone who would make projections like me, it's like another thing that you would throw into your model. So I would the bat, when it's projecting home runs, the bat will just use past home runs. Probably the bat X will add in barrel rate. I don't know exactly what it adds in, but probably it's using past home runs and also barrel rate and maybe xwOBA or xwOBAcon. And then in the future, you would throw in bat speed also. And it's not going to change the picture on anybody really, but it could improve the projection. Like from my article and from a tweet I did earlier today, an extra mile per hour of bat speed could improve a player's projection anywhere around like 5 points, 3 to 5 points, while controlling for other variables. So if you have a guy going to drive line and increasing his bat speed 5 miles per hour at the very extreme end of the spectrum, maybe his projection is 15 WOBA points too low. And WOBA, I mean, you could argue how much we should care about that, but that improves all of his counting stats projections too. It's all his fantasy relevant projections too.
Yeah. Very well said. I wish I was able to make my own projections like you are, but that's definitely something I would incorporate. So you mentioned, I think you posted in the pull hitter Discord a list of top bat speed gainers. And Esteury Ruiz and Johan Rojas lead things off. And then Nick Gonzales, I think that's an interesting one. We'll come back to that. Juan Soto, Nolan Shanwell, then some kind of nobodies, some Nick Fortes, Rafael Ortega, Connor Capel, Ramon Laureano is gaining bat speed apparently. And then Matt Wallner, like that one's interesting. Jock Peterson gaining bat speed. And then you mentioned Corbin Carroll has actually gained bat speed apparently from last year. Colton Cowser, Tyler O'Neill, some others. You mentioned Corbin Carroll earlier as just kind of, he's got the bat speed. He's got the short swing, which is a big thing. I know before the bat speed stuff got released, like Eno sent me like a leaderboard, and he was just like, you got to look for the guys with the 7.5 feet or lower swing length plus whatever the bat speed number was. So I mean, like there's stuff to look at with Corbin Carroll, but the production's just been so bad this year, and everyone knows about the shoulder issue. So how would you value Corbin Carroll right now in dynasty leagues? I think it's just a really tough question. I feel like it's probably the question I've gotten the most since the start of the season. People with offers to sell low on Carroll, people with offers to buy low on Carroll. We don't really know what's going to happen with like his shoulder thing, like when that's going to not be an issue anymore. We know how good he can be at full strength. How are you valuing Corbin Carroll right now in dynasty?
So I think they're the two best buy lows in fantasy this right now at this moment would be Julio Rodriguez and Corbin Carroll. I think if you look at the metrics I was talking about, walks, strikeouts, and then some sort of power indicator, Carroll looks pretty normal compared to last year. His barrel rate is slightly down, but the fact that he's one of the bat speed gainers is a huge hole in the whole, like his shoulder is still bothering him argument. And his xWOBA is much more normal. I mean, it's not elite, but I think it's closer to league average. And my peak projections for him remain really strong, like 30-30-ish, with like a 135 WRC plus as like a peak projection. So to give you an idea what you could go for, I kind of felt this pressure because I think J-Rod and Carroll, they're going to turn it around. So the window is not going to stay open forever. And then Bo Bichette was another guy, but with a lower ceiling guy that I think is a good buy low. So I was shopping. I tried to get Carroll and Highlander without moving Tatis. I tried to give up Judge because it looks like it may not be my year, or like put it together a package of a bunch of things. I wasn't able to do that, so I had to pivot, and I did have to give up Tatis. But since I was giving up the best player in the deal, I was able to ask for a lot more in return. So I got Crochet along with Carroll and Torkelson. Torkelson's been great since I've done that deal. It was like 2 weeks ago. Carroll has been he hasn't really turned it around yet, but I think he's been a little better, and his average exit velocity has been like just as like a raw kind of crabby indicator, or a quick and dirty indicator of his power over the last 2 weeks has been better, like 92. And Crochet has obviously been really good. So that's the kind of thing you might look for. I do think that nobody really thinks, or very few people are really out on him. Like I saw on Twitter a poll with the usual suspects like Chris Clegg and Eric Cross and Ross and Imaginary Brick Wall, and someone had asked on Twitter, a Twitter poll, like, should I trade Jose Ramirez for Carroll as a rebuilder? They all said yes. I think one out of a different guy had said maybe not, but everybody agrees kind of that he's a good buy low, but then the extent of how good a buy low is he, then you can get more divergence in opinions, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, I mean, the fact he gained bat speed, and you kind of mentioned like how that kind of is a hole in the shoulder argument. So like, are you almost viewing this as sort of everyone's talking about the shoulder because it's just something people were talking about preseason? But do you think there's like a chance that this is just a good old fashioned slump and he's kind of the same guy, and like you could see that first round player emerge here in the coming weeks? Jordan, did you hear me?
Hey, sorry. Yeah, my Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay.
wasn't sure.
Yeah, so I was following up on the Corbin Carroll comment about like how it kind of is a hole in the shoulder injury narrative with the fact that he has added bat speed. So like, do you think this is just like a good old fashioned slump that people are attributing to the shoulder, and like he could still be a first round caliber player like going forward?
Yeah, I would say it's exactly that. I don't think the shoulder narrative really holds up. I don't think the team has incentive to really be running him out there over and over again if that was an issue. And I don't think from his comments it's coming through as that's part of the issue. But if you just look at his like player page, it strikes me as like trying to find a narrative there when there really isn't that much of one. I mean, his barrel rate is like 1.3 percentage points down from his career average. And his xwOBA, I mean, his xwOBA is a lot better than his wOBA, like 50 points higher than his wOBA. And I think you'd be getting a lot less panic about him if he was closer to his like league average-ish xwOBA, because he's still running a lot. Yeah, so I don't feel too concerned about that. And I think long-term shoulder injuries for hitters tend to sap power, if anything, for a short time, but there's not much evidence that they would sap power for like multiple years. So from a dynasty perspective, I think it's fine.
Nice. Well, my 11th place draft champions Champions League team hopes you're right. And that was a really good trade. I mean, Spencer Torkelson was a really obvious buy low a couple weeks ago. And he was kind of popping on some of the bat speed stuff in terms of just a guy with no production to really match what the bat speed data was suggesting with him. So really nice trade there.
Thanks.
What do you think about Wallner? Just because I was high on him before the season. I was actually I feel like Brent Rooker is basically having the season I thought Wallner could have. And he's got great bat speed and a shorter, like similar bat speed to Giancarlo Stanton actually, and a shorter swing. Do you like the idea of trying to scoop him up at all if he's been dropped in a shallower dynasty, or just buying extremely low in a deeper dynasty?
Yeah, so the bat speed numbers are surprising. Like the fact that he's as close to Stanton or like a second behind Stanton, but he's definitely trading off. Like if you look at his stats this year, his strikeout rate is like 40% in the minors, and it was like 50% in the majors. So if that's the costs of having bat speed like Stanton, it may be too costly. But I think a traditional projection would account for his weak strikeouts and walks to start the year, but it wouldn't account for this bat speed measure. And like Steamer, the Bat X, and me all have him close to league average right now with the bat. So then if you account for that bat speed, you could get him more above league average. And I think a team that's power hungry, like one of my main event teams, is really desperate for RBIs. I would definitely be watching out for that. But I think it definitely has to be like you should be adding him like for free, and I think he's available for free in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And the other thing is just that the Twins they really like platooning, so it's a little it kind of caps the ceiling, I think, somewhat. But I'm at least keeping an eye on him, and I think probably his league average projection deserves to be underrates him a little bit because of the bat speed.
Yeah, I think that's all well said. There are certainly, I'm sure there are other guys that could have a bat speed similar to Stanton if they were okay with striking out like 40% of the time. So, Nick Gonzales really jumps out to me. I'm not. We'll get to the like no power guys here in a second, but Nick Gonzales clearly looks like a guy that got better during the off season from what he was last year. Like I said, he showed up as like your third highest bat speed gainer relative to last year. He's been just hitting right in the middle of the Pirates lineup. He's been on a bit of a heater lately, hitting 282 right now with a strikeout rate under 20%. He's not really walking a ton, but he seems like he's taken over that second base job, and he might not give it back. Obviously, he's an ascending asset in dynasty leagues, but do you think that he's intriguing enough that you would maybe even buy high on Nick Gonzales?
I think he's a tough one to analyze because he was so much worse than we had hoped for years.
Mm-hmm.
And then so I was kind of out on him. But coming out of college, I was like really excited about him and his crazy college numbers parked. But now I think he's reestablishing value. I think the steamer is like a little above league average, and it doesn't account for anything like this, the bat speed gains. So if you take the bat speed gains seriously, and you apply like the sort of effect sizes from my article. So if it's like 3 points, 3 points of WOBA for each mile per hour of bat speed, he could be underrated by 15 points of WOBA. So then we're talking more like we're getting closer to like a 110 WRC bat with good power, and he's playing every day. So I think that has value in 15 teamers. I don't know if I would go as far as like buying high on him. I think of the guys you mentioned, Rooker sounds really good to me as a buy high, and I've actually kind of blown away by how good his projections look just generally now. So I have him at like 33 homers per 600 plate appearances and like a 120 WRC plus. I think the other guys, the Bat and the Steamer, are similar on him as well. So I really like him as a buy high.
Brent Rooker of the A's as a buy high. All right. Now, I mentioned a few of these just, we got some speedsters who added bad speed, Astor Ruiz, Johan Rojas, Nolan Shanwell apparently added bat speed. I don't know if you have anything to say about Nick Fortes or Ortega or Capel, but any of these just kind of, people that maybe someone would roll their eyes at it if you showed them that they added bat speed. Are there any of them that you particularly like?
Well, I think Shanwell, he's still like quite rates quite poorly by bat speed, but it's kind of more in line with sort of 15 homer power peak projection. I still think Luis Ariz is not a bad comp for him, which would be fine if a non-traditional at first base, like from an offensive standpoint, that would be fine. And I think last year's outlier bat speed from the BA article, I think he had like the lowest. And I think that was a bit unfairly harsh on him, just given how good he was from like a contact perspective and a plate discipline perspective last year. It was really rare to see that in the same year he was drafted. Esteri is interesting. I think his barrel rate is way up too. So I mean, the A's basically are never playing him, only strictly platoon versus lefties. So I do think he's a good roll of the dice, but part of that is like a belief in him regressing to the mean defensively, but regressing to like regressing positively towards the mean because he's so fast. So I'm sort of hoping there that his defense improves to be more what you'd expect from a guy with his speed, because by like outs above average, he's been more like league average, and by UZR, I think he's been below average. So he really needs to be valuable defensively, even though he does appear to be more have more pop than people gave him credit for going into the year.
Yeah, I mean he did have years in the minors where he hit for a little bit of power. It's the park probably matters for him more than it matters for a lot of guys because he's going to have a lot of wall scrapers. And yeah, I mean he's probably very affordable right now because of the playing time, like you said, and just lack of production to date. Do you have any thoughts on Rojas at all? I mean, he's at least stealing more bases than.
Yeah, I think Rojas is a guy that's he's kind of never-endingly in my FAAB chains each week because he's like a cheap source of speed.
Right.
And then seeing that he does have some secret or some hidden untapped power potential. So I think anybody with defense that's going to keep them in the lineup, and he's super young, and then he's also stealing bases. I think he's interesting, but it's still more like flyer sort of territory. It's hard to count on Esteri because he's not playing, and Rojas because he hasn't been hitting enough yet. But I do think that they both have low key breakout potential.
So I am not going to be updating our dynasty rankings until early June after I update the prospect rankings. But I already know that there's going to be some guys that are going to be very tough to rank. I really don't like doing dynasty rankings in like May or June because it just feels like you're going to overreact on some players and you just try to protect against that as much as you can. But I've got a list of the most surprising hitters to date for me in a positive way and the most surprising hitters in a negative way. And this was just based on earned auction dollars for a 15-team 5x5 standard league. But Jerks and Profar has been worth $30 so far. Brent Rooker, who we just talked about, $25. Ryan Jeffers, $21 at catcher for the Twins. Jake Cronenworth, so two Padres here in Profar and Cronenworth showing up as $20+ guys so far. Were you in on any of these guys before the season? Are you buying that? Are you buying what they've shown thus far? Like, are these guys that I should be like, yeah, I have to move this guy way up the dynasty rankings based on what they've done so far?
The only guy that I was in on heading into the season was Cronenworth, and that's only because he was sort of underperformer last year, so it was just like a traditional buy low type of thing. Because particularly in Highlander, where I really need MLB at bats from wherever I can find them, and it's not like Cronenworth is anything going to set the world on fire, but I thought that he would at least bounce back to perform more like his projections. I wasn't really in on any other guys. Rooker, I didn't really trust his playing time. The A's are always. I never would have thought the A's being too crowded would be a problem, but the A's being too crowded has been a real headache for me in my fantasy teams this year. But I think he's really stepped it up, and I do like buying high on him. I think Profar, just with the Padres outfield having a lot of room, he'll continue to play every day, but I don't think he's anywhere near as good as he's been, and I'm more just like okay with him as like a fallback option if you need at bats. And now Cronenworth's at the point where I'd rather sell high because I think he's kind of the pendulum is swung the other way, and now he's performing a little too good for how good I actually expect him to be. Yeah, and then Jeffers, I think Jeffers looks good too. His projected I have his WRC similar to Rooker, but then it's a little harder to get excited about him just because of the catcher hate, or the ingrained catcher hate within each of us.
Dude, I was looking at some of I was trying to figure out, like, because I'm not having a great NFBC year. Like, I'm gonna probably cash in some leagues and win maybe a league or two, but and we'll see. I mean, it's not even June yet, but I was trying to like figure out like where did I go wrong and it like catcher has just been just landmines everywhere. And I feel like I've either got, if I don't have William Contreras or Will Smith, like almost all the other catchers I was drafting are either injured or really underperforming. And then Jeffers is sitting there as a guy that I liked him as like, if I have to go really cheap at catcher, and I just never went that cheap. I always took my second catcher before getting to Jeffers. And I mean, that's just something I really regret right now. It's a tough position. Like if you're like, I've got Kybert Ruiz on a handful of teams, Bo Naylor on a handful of teams. I even have like Gabriel Moreno on a couple of teams, even though he wasn't necessarily a target. And like when you're getting a sub 200 batting average that you've been starting all season, and you're not even at 15 RBI or 15 runs, that's something I look at, and it's like, well, that's why this team, because it's like I like the rest of this roster, but I've been just killing my batting average and my counting stats with these two guys I've been using at catcher all season. I don't know if that's an issue you're going through.
Yeah. So my two most rostered catchers, I've had a lot of problems this year in NFBC also. But catcher hasn't been the biggest because I have a lot of Contreras and a lot of Sal Perez. But then I do have a lot of Ruiz, probably my most rostered catcher, along with William Contreras. And I guess the flu, if you're trying to make excuses, he lost like 17 pounds with the flu, and he was placed on the IL. And then he had very small rehab, or maybe not even rehab. I think a small rehab, but he's been really really horrendous. And I think catcher position aside, I've had a lot of my top end picks have been fine, but my back end picks fill up my roster. There's been a lot of not a specific suck, but more of a general all around type of suck, in the words of Pete Fairbanks.
Yeah, I mean, props to you for getting a ton of Contreras. I have a decent amount of Contreras, but I think once it got into sort of February, March, I was ending up with less of him just because pitching was in such high demand, and I was grabbing pitchers where I was grabbing Contreras earlier in drafts, but should have just rode with him all the way up to opening day. Okay, so here are the guys that are the most surprising to me from a negative standpoint. Andrew Vaughn, -$6. Ian Happ, -$2. George Springer, -$1. Heimer Candelario, -$1. Gleyber Torres, just a positive by $1. Which of those guys are you most concerned about going forward here?
So I think with all of them, except I guess Gleyber is the only one that I'm not really that concerned about. But even his projection is down a little bit, I think. All the other ones, I think they should bounce back, but none of them, they're all like past peak or like definitely need to revise expectations lower compared to where I was at the beginning of the year. I think particularly with Vaughn, it's harder and harder to, I think with his dynasty ranks, there's always been a gap between his dynasty ranks and his redraft ranks, because it was easy to dream on some sort of potential. And I think it's harder and harder to do that. I think he should be solid, but like, it's harder to see like a high ceiling there. But he should be like decent, I guess.
Yeah, he's sort of become like a replacement level guy almost for fantasy, where like I'm dealing with like a injury to Casas, and I'd go scoop up Andrew Vaughn, which is not something I thought I'd be doing before the season, but that's where we're at. Yeah, I agree. I think Gleyber is probably the least concerning. I think Heimer will get going if he can just stay healthy and get some home series banked as the weather is warm. And he's been.
I think Heimer was like the most traditional like redraft asset there, but they haven't like they're still playing him every day. Like I just checked like 20 games in a row. So I think as long as the Reds haven't given up on him, I wouldn't either for redraft purposes. But I think in the longer term, with a lot of guys getting healthy, then there are some potential playing time risks.
Right. I mean, I think Noelvi Marte and Christian Encarnacion Strand, I think they could come back around the exact same time in early June. So clock's ticking, I guess, on Candelaria to produce a bit more to be able to stay in the lineup every day there.
Yeah.
Okay, Jordan, couple more topics here, and I'll let you go. I know before the season, I mean, I had a crush on Tanner Houck for a long time, but during the off season, you know, he didn't even have a guaranteed spot in that rotation before like the Lucas Giolito injury, and I don't know if there was another injury, but at least during the winter, there was a point there where it was like, is Whitlock going to be in the rotation? Is Houck going to be in the rotation? Maybe Houck's the backup closer if Kenley's not ready. Now Houck is realizing that potential. So I wanted to, and you were really high on Houck in the offseason. You were hounding me to give him to you in Highlander all offseason. So I want to know, who is your current sort of pre-breakout starting pitcher crush? And I mean, it could be a guy that's not performing the way you think he'll perform, or maybe a guy who's not getting the opportunity you think he'll deserve. But who is kind of your current Tanner Houck level pre-breakout SP crush?
So I think I got to go with my boy David Peterson here. David Peterson has been a guy that Steamer has been projecting David Peterson like absurdly low ERAs for the last 2 years now, and he's looked really good in his rehab. I think it's been split across CPX and Class A and Double A, but he's basically been flawless in terms of strikeouts and walks. And the Steamer is getting like approaching 3, although it's split between relief and starting pitching. And then my projections for him also, the projections that the Stuff Plus Field projections featured at The Athletic are really high on him also, like 3.5 ERA with league average being around 4, and that's mostly in like a starting role. I think the risk with Peterson is there's not a clear, there is room sort of, the Mets have a lot of mediocre starting pitching right now, but it's not clear that they're going to give him the job. But I do think he's available in most, so that's kind of like a low risk, high upside, in my view, flyer that you can take. And I definitely have a lot of Peterson shares. And then I do like buying high on Crochet and Jordan Hicks, the relief RP to SP success stories. I think those guys both have really strong projections rest of the way. And I think it's, so there's a chance people, especially with Hicks, like his peripherals haven't been as good. He's sort of his like peripherals and strikeout and walk numbers haven't been as good as his like his really shiny ERA. But I think his peripherals could actually regress positively. And I mean, his ERA is going to regress. It should be more. I have him more in like mid 3s, but I think we'd all be happy with that. And then lastly, well, I mean, Hunter Brown is another kind of Peterson-like projection who is destroyed some of my fantasy teams with his 9 earned run start. But I think as long as he can stay in the rotation, which is the risk with him, he may get optioned or transition to a long relief role. But I think he has enough of a track record across the minors and the majors, and his stuff, his velocity looks normal. So I think his projections still look really good long term. But it may be a bumpy road in the short term in terms of role.
Yeah, so maybe go after Brown in Dynasty. I don't think he's been dropped too much in redraft. And then if he does get dropped in redraft, that'll mean that he's been even worse. So that's tougher. I'm same way. I've got Brown on a handful of teams. It hasn't been fun, and hasn't been fun watching him pitch, and hasn't been fun like deciding whether or not to use him each week, because it seems like he's had some cupcakes on the schedule where you're just kind of like, well, I got to use him here, and then it doesn't go well. And the David Peterson one, like I've been a David Peterson guy for, I'm not that proud to admit it, but I've been a David Peterson guy for years. So that's a good one, because there'll probably come a point in the year where he's getting, at least a a starter too, where you could add him for free in like NFBC and stuff like that. So that's a good one. Okay.
Yeah.
And did you have anything else you wanted to add there?
Well, I think just with Brown, I agree. Like, he hasn't been dropped in 15 team. In 12 team, I was able to add him in my RotoWire OC, but I also didn't care that much because it was 12 team. So it was more just for, like, I think he has the Angels this week, and more for matchup reasons. But yeah.
Okay. You got a trade offer for me here?
Oh yeah, so I gave James a little heads up, but I do like to keep him on his toes. So in Highlander, I was thinking of a traditional challenge trade buy low, sell high type. Davis Schneider for Vaughn Grissom. James has Grissom. I have Schneider. And to set the context, like, Schneider has been really good, Grissom's been really bad. But heading into the year, Grissom would have had much more helium, especially after headlining the sale deal. I don't know what James is going to say though, so let's hear it.
Yeah, I think this is a very, very reasonable offer. I am not contending, and if I were contending, I think I would do this. Batting average is one of my worst categories, and that's probably Schneider's worst category. I'm trying to think I was trying to think of like a good sort of comp for what I think Davis Schneider is. But I think he's Davis Schneider does not have a fast bat, by the way, which might be part of why actually neither of these guys have fast bats, but yeah, I think I'm going to hold Grissom. I mean, it's been barely any playing time. I do think I don't think he's just guaranteed to play for the Red Sox. I'm sure he's got more kind of fantasy cachet than real life value. So like it wouldn't surprise me if Vaughn Grissom was out of a job, like out of a starting job at some point this season. But I think it's more likely that I'd be excited to keep Grissom at the end of the year than I would be excited to keep Schneider. And so I'm not playing for this year. So I'm just gonna ride it out with Grissom. But I appreciate the offer.
Yeah, no, that's good, and I like whenever you reject my deals, that means you agree with me on Grissom being you haven't lost faith in Grissom, so I'm actually happy to hear that. And I was prepared to maybe up it to Cronenworth, but I think I'll just sit back for now.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I'd be more annoyed, I think, if I traded Grissom and he because I feel like he's about to start hitting. He's hitting what, like 170 now, and his projections are 270 basically. So
yeah,
I think he's about to start hitting, and I can't see Schneider being someone where I'm just like, oh man, can't believe I pulled that one over on Jordan. Like he probably wished he still had Schneider. Like he's just he's a guy who's leading off right now, but it's not something I think the Jays will want to be a long-term thing there. So
yeah, but ultimately, I think you nailed the evaluation, and my thoughts on this too is like long-term. I have Grissom a little bit better than Schneider, like more defensive value, more speed, and similar peak WRC, like from my projection perspective. But short-term, Schneider's probably more reliable in the very near future. But yeah, makes sense.
I agree. All right, so Jordan, why don't you let the listeners know what you've been working on and where they can find all the stuff you've been working on?
Yeah, so I've been producing like maybe bi-weekly articles at Rotographs, kind of just different analytical pieces, different sort of baseball research pieces, and that's where I'm doing most of my writing these days. And then at Prospects Live and Scott the Stat Line, you can find some of my projections, peak projections, and then on the Athletic, you can find my pitcher, like Stuff Plus Field pitcher projections. And I think Eno is actually updating them this week, his ranks, but he'll have the projections in there. Yeah.
Awesome, man. You're killing it. Love that you're on Photographs and obviously doing great work on those other sites as well. And really appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you. It's been good. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, James.
Yeah, and feel free to keep sending me half-hearted trade offers, and
Yeah, perfect.
we'll discuss them and probably decline them, and we'll just keep it moving. But thanks to Jordan Rosenblum for joining me today. Podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks, and prospect rankings will be updated in a couple days.